My name's Dan King from Research Consulting, just going to be chairing this session. My main aim is to say a few words and then get on to our speakers for the session. Essentially what we have planned is a couple of talks that case studies, and then we're going to move fairly promptly to a kind of an open floor panel conversation. So save your questions, we've got plenty of time for questions and discussion around the topics coming up today. So we're in the kind of policy and partnerships theme, and I think our session is very much at the kind of partnerships, place, ecosystems part of that conversation. So that's the title of the session. Just moving on quickly. We've got three speakers today covering two case studies. So we've got Linda from Edinburgh Napier University, and we've got Jessica Boot-Marshall and Louise Sutherland, Lincoln and Cambridge Enterprise, respectively, who'll be talking about our second case study of the session. So what's the rationale for this? Creating successful sector and place-based innovation ecosystems is a paramount importance, and it is something we're seeing an awful lot of. We heard aspect of that in a previous session that we were talking about. One of the things we'll be kind of looking at through the session, the characteristics of ecosystems, what it means in terms of the design of interventions and collaborative programs, capability and capacity building, particularly in our second case study, which focused on that aspect of ecosystem development, and then thinking about some of the insights and good practice through those two case studies, and perhaps from our later conversation in the panel, some additional case studies and examples of good practice that we can learn from. Just thinking about that historically, I always kind of look to take a bit of a long view on some of these things, and that's apt because our first talk also takes something of a longitudinal view around ecosystem development, something I think we need to see more of and actually is really valuable in informing lessons learned around what works, what interventions work, and how to design future interventions. Back in 2012, the Wilson Review, will anyone remember that in the room? There's perhaps some of you will, maybe not all. He talked about a shift away from linear notions of technology transfer and graduate recruitment, emphasizing that more sophisticated and integrated notion of ecosystems. And he'd observed that through that review, and that's something that certainly is carried through. And then we move on to contemporary views, recent Connecting Capability Fund call. Yes, I appreciate that's England only, but just using it to exemplify the contemporary view around ecosystems, the importance of ecosystems development, and the sorts of funding opportunities that might be out there to support that. So before I hand over to our first speaker, just a quick recap on the session. We're focused on university partnerships and how these support development and capacity building through the lens of ecosystems. A couple of case studies. The first one, Linda, will be talking about a longitudinal review of lessons learned from a multi-partner knowledge ecosystem, which involve various university partners. And the second takes a slight different view of that and looks at the role of university to university partnership can play in building capacity to enhance capacity and capability to support innovation ecosystems, featuring two different types of university, and we'll hear some of the lessons learned and value add that came from that example. But first, let me hand over to Linda, who's going to talk to us about some work which takes a longitudinal view of a particular case study in Scotland.
I'm just wondering, did I leave my glasses on that middle table? I'm just going to get down and see if I can find them. Are they there? Can I have the paperwork as well? Sorry. That was a good start, wasn't it? That, just the paperwork, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'll just give a quick intro to myself. My name's Linda Wallace, Edinburgh Napier, and prior to that, for probably most of the past 20 years, I spent my time at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. Prior to that, actually, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, which will become a little bit relevant when I go into the case study because it was from pharmaceutical manufacturing. So this presentation comes out of sort of a PhD research that I embarked on while I was at Strathclyde. And I was working at Strathclyde in a business development role, creating collaborations with industry, which were around research, innovation, public sector funding bids and the likes. So I did see the kind of evolution of this ecosystem from the very beginning. Now, I did meander a bit, and it took me, it was a 7-year part-time PhD, but it's actually taken me more than a decade, 12 years actually. So, I got there in the end, and I'm trying to spin that positively. Life does get in the way when you undertake such a long-term piece of research, but I spun it positively because I've ended up with a longitudinal view of what has happened in this context. And what I've seen is things come to fruition that I might not have seen if I had just dipped into it over a 4-year PhD. So I'm going to make that a positive thing. Presentation is split into 3 parts, a flavour, and I mean a flavour, on ecosystem theory. I'm going to then give a wee bit of the case study, and I'm going to try and show you how I made the link between the theory and the practice to come up with my own contribution, a little bit of a theory around innovation ecosystems. I was also going to suggest that if people are interested at this point, I would be happy to convene and start an ecosystem sort of community of practice on the back of the conference. So I just wanted to put that out there, and people can reach out to me if they're interested. I think if I got to say next slide. Okay. This wee thing here. Okay. So here's the title, and here's the bit on theory. So there are lots of words used in the literature and also in practice about ecosystems. You get innovation ecosystems, business ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems, urban ecosystems, maybe to do with future cities. These are all parts of what are considered ecosystems, or, in other words, a complex system by nature that we are trying to grapple with in our practice. I think it's probably, most of these have a common sort of basis, and really they all have a kind of, I'll go on to the next slide now, because they all have a sort of system level outcome. They have a shared goal. So an ecosystem is a collection of partners and stakeholders, but they're coming together in some way to define a shared goal. And that comes out of obviously a lot of discussion, but really it comes out of people finding this shared interest and being able to have those discussions and agree on something. And that is really a critical part, and probably one of the big differentiators of an ecosystem, as opposed to, so for example, supply chain networks that might coalesce around a particular sector, and organisational fields or networks. They are really about a shared goal and being able to sort of all focus on that. Another key characteristic is a participant heterogeneity, so it's very interdisciplinary, often cross-sectoral. And the nature of the interdependencies is very specifically not about contractual arrangements. It's a sort of loose agreement that becomes increasingly less loose and more highly coupled. So it's an organic organization. The participants in it are doing this because they want to. There are no contracts. They're all leaning into something that they believe in that will deliver benefits for their organization and for themselves. There's also a coordination mechanism, and I think that's really critical because that brings us to the role of universities in a way. So I think universities have convening power, and they have an amazing ability to bring partners together and be that sort of honest broker, if you like. But I do think the coordination role is critical, and I'm going to give a case study that will tell you about the coordination role of a university-based collaborative research centre, or hub. Invariably, it was allocated funding with different titles, but a CRC, Collaborative Research Centre, or hub, that was established involving 7 universities across the UK, It's got international links as well to other centres of excellence. It involved, large primes, large pharmaceutical manufacturing companies. It also involved supply chain companies, regulators. So it became, it didn't start like that, but it became very much a large organisation with no contracts set up. So the coordination mechanism, in my thesis, I'm making the point that the coordination mechanism and the infrastructure that enabled this to be so successful was underpinned by the university's role in that coordination. So a wee bit more about the theory. Can you give me a wee signal if I get to 5 minutes left? So I'm trying to boil the ocean here into this presentation, but I wanted to put up this slide to show that on the left-hand side, what you're seeing there is that I'm not focusing on that. That's where there's the flow of energy and materials, and we're talking about maybe urban ecosystems, smart cities, or maybe in industrial ecosystems like energy supply. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking much more about the second two columns of flow of knowledge and flow of value. And in particular, I'm going to be focusing on knowledge ecosystems. So you can see there, a knowledge ecosystem is, mostly location-based, which I would say this one wasn't, but mostly location-based. Collective translation of advances in research knowledge into products and services. The other part I'm going to focus on a little bit is then the innovation platform and business ecosystems, which is about the delivery of value and propositions through collaboration. So, as I said, there's all these types. I'm going to focus on these two, but my colleague Jessica afterwards is going to talk more about what I would think is an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I've just shown you that we're going to cover more diversity in terms of types. But for some of you, you're probably thinking, goodness, I didn't even know there was so many different types. What does all that mean? So we won't be able to go into enormous detail, but essentially, these are the characteristics that we have, or the academics have, agreed are the 9. So there's 3 dimensions. That's the roles, the structures, and the processes. And then within those 3 dimensions, there's sub-dimensions, as you can see there. And you can all read for yourselves, but I think there's a few that you might find familiar. So self-organisation, for example, we do see that in funding calls. We do hear about complementarity, co-creation, co-evolution. These are terms that are cropping up more and more in the large critical mass funding bids. And in particular, I think some of the place-based funding has definitely called for an ecosystem approach. So I just wanted to highlight that there is more to it. There's some very interesting, sort of maybe less explicit characteristics such as non-linearity. And what that essentially means is that it's the unpredictability. It speaks to the complexity of the system. It's the unpredictable nature of those interactions that happen between the stakeholders. And it's why things are so emergent. It's why things are so... and it allows for co-evolution, co-creation, because we don't know what those interactions are how they're going to change what we do, how it's going to influence the direction of that technological development, as we're talking about in this case. I think the modularity one I would pick out as well, because in this case, we were encouraged to create the centre and not think about that as the end, but encouraged to continually go for additional funding, doctoral training centres, translational funding, other research. And so this mandate we were given by our funders, the EPSRC, meant that we were fully into expanding our means from the beginning. The shared vision is very important. Due to the nature of, if you like, the self-organisation, it meant that people were coming together because they wanted to be there. And the shared vision was deliberately large. It was a 10-year duration, 10 to 15 years. And the funder wanted to see what we were going to do in the short term, but what we were also going to plan to do in the long term. So I think that forced us into a modular approach where the funding was being brought in on a modular basis. So I'll show you some pictures of that bring that to life in a minute. So finally, on the theory, we've got this evolving nature of an ecosystem. And along the top here, you'll see that the value of co-created value is increasing in volume. And that, as an ecosystem is born, as it expands, and as if it reaches maturation, is the game. But as you'll see just below that, the balance between cooperation and competition appears to be, from the theory, and I'm not sure if you recognise this, but appears to become more closed. So that hard line around the mature ecosystem there is indicating where competition amongst partners is increasing. And I guess I should highlight that the little boxes indicate the modular nature of an ecosystem. So now on to my case study, the role of a university-based CRC hub in inducing innovation in ecosystems. So the context for this study was an industry grand challenge, an area of disruptive innovation in the pharmaceutical manufacturing sector. For 500 years, pharmaceuticals have been manufactured in increasingly large pots that look a bit like that one in the bottom, with more and more probes going in the sides to just monitor what was going on inside. But it was really a bit of a black box. It was inefficient, a lot of waste, a lot of impact on the environment. It's one of the big polluters. So there was a challenge put to us from the industry to move paradigm shift towards continuous manufacturing, which is you can basically put it on this wall, a big, it would literally be on the wall. And so smaller plant footprint, it was controlled, there wasn't waste, and ironically, it was going to future-proof the sector in order that they could make smaller batch sizes for bespoke medicines that were maybe serving small niche areas and make it viable for those to be manufactured. So this was a real game changer for the sector, but it had a lot of technical challenges. 5 minutes. So basically, in a nutshell, what they were doing is they were coming together. I'm using this analogy, which I used in my analysis, to, like birds flying in formation, they were stakeholders from different parts of the sector, so large pharmaceutical companies coming together with supply chain companies who wanted to serve them and provide them with the equipment that they needed for the future. And then the scientists and engineers who were interested in playing a part. And they came together in workshops, they came together one-to-one, they came together in small groups that they self-formed, they self-organized into. They came together in whatever way, but they responded to each other and they tried to get to their goal together. So that's why I hope you find that analogy useful, but it just in a sense gives us what was happening. But let's go into the detail of what working towards that shared goal actually meant. So as I said, it was a world-leading consortium. There's partnerships across so universities, we've got catapults, we've got innovation centres, Scott funders, the government, the local economic development agencies, really lots and lots of inputs like doctoral training centres to create leaders of the future. So a real effort from the very beginning to focus on the long-term goal, the people and the technologies we were going to need to make these future factories of the future that you can see in the final right-hand side of the slide. So the activities were research capacity building, creating state-of-the-art facilities, translational programs, and the people that I mentioned, skills for the future. And the translational program was very collaborative with industry, with the catapults and so on, but essentially we have these outcomes which are predictive design tools, delivering a rapid innovation pipeline, integrated continuous manufacturing pilot plant, new supply chain configurations, and the workforce, as well as streamline. We were engaging with the regulator, so a streamlined regulatory process. And those all input into the design of the factories of the future. Public sector funding, I have to give a shout out to the START seed funding from Scottish Funding Council, which is a very special fund that brought industry and academics together to deal with challenges. EPSRC, and then a collaboration around the supply chain configurations of the future that would need to respond to the new technological configurations. And then this collaboration between medicines manufacturers in the UK, which didn't attract funding, but it later they co-funded the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre, which was attracting globally mobile investment from pharmaceutical companies that could have gone anywhere in the world, and it's now being invested in a facility at Glasgow Airport. So that's real jobs in Scotland, it's real impact, and it's allowed me, because it only happened after I should have finished my PhD, it's allowed me to explain just how successful this is. And this is the very latest 2024 investment from EPSRC. So public sector funding was critical. MMIC is testament to that. This is a very, very successful collaboration. And I'm giving you these slides, but I won't talk too much about them. But this is my methods to, if anyone's interested, take the quotes, like round the side, coded everything in terms of creating categories, and then I've basically aligned it to used ecosystems theory as a lens, and ultimately created my own theory. And I'll finish with, this is a really important slide, because what I've done here is I'm making a contribution to the innovation ecosystems literature by bringing in a concept, the space of possibilities, which comes from complex systems theory. And I'm using it with ecosystems theory to explain that once the collaboration and open innovation approach has been agreed, and it can be for any of the reasons I've got at the bottom of that slide, a shared vision is created and an open innovation approach is there. And we have the partners, we've got the complementarity, and we've got the capital and resources. We've won some funding to make things happen. We do create this space of possibilities, and in that space, the real work happens. That is where the collaborators come together to do, if anyone was in the last session, in the workshop session that was managed by Claire and others, it really is where the magic happens, where the creativity happens, where people come together. And out of that, the knowledge is applied that they had collectively, is applied in new ways and in new contexts. We get this systems level output that can't be achieved by individuals. And we extend our partners, our industry partners, dynamic capabilities. We make ourselves a team. And then, not want to be too complex, but there's two types of collaboration, two types of innovation. There's the incremental development, and then there's exaptation, where we bring existing technologies and we use them in a new context. So I'm finding examples of both of these in this case study, leading to new products, processes, and services. And I've laid it out in this kind of stacked way because I want to finish with the university-based collaborative research centre, or hub, was absolutely fundamental in underpinning this successful innovation ecosystem. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. As I said, we're going to take the second case study now, and then we'll come on to questions as a collective later on, hopefully allow us to explore that. But that's a new phrase there, the space of possibilities. I like that. I like that. So on to our second talk, and I think you're going to talk first. Do you want the microphone?
Good afternoon, everyone. Does that work? About right distance? Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and to share what we have been doing on our university collaboration. But before I start, a little bit about background about me. I am the director of Ceres Agritech, the program that we're going to be talking about today. But I have an eclectic career, which I guess has come together in this project. I've done some research in my time, but I've also worked in industry, in the food industry, in the agricultural industry, working in all parts of it, from premium food retailers through suppliers to farmers and growers. And you'll see how that comes together. So Ceres comes out of Cambridge Enterprise, which, for those who don't know, is the commercialisation arm of the University of Cambridge. And we've for a long time recognised those challenges around getting early stage university research out into the real world. We've had a number of initiatives. Probably the most notable is Apollo Therapeutics, which was a unique industry academic partnership to commercialise early stage drug discovery, which is now a multi-million-pound biopharmaceutical company that's raised investment of over 500 million. Now you're saying, why is that relevant? Because what happened back in 2017 was that Cambridge Enterprise recognised that agri-tech was going to be really important in the east of England, and thought, well, let's try the model that's worked for Apollo in therapeutics to agtech, and founded Ceres Agritech, a regional collaboration between 5 university partners, Cambridge, Lincoln, who are here today, and it's great to see Hearts at the back as well, UEA and Reading, and 3 research institutes, John Innes, NIAB and Rothamsted. And we all came together with a vision to make the East of England the UK's agri-tech cluster. And this was gratefully funded by a 4.8 million from Research England's Connecting Capability Fund. So our agri-tech collaboration has 3 important components behind its success. Firstly, it's about place. The East of England is a nationally significant centre for crop-based agri-food, supporting 88,000 jobs, GVA of 3.8 billion, making it the most concentrated crop production area in the UK. We're very lucky. We have more than 50% of grade 1 soil, the best soil in the country, and we produce 15% of English farm outputs. That includes not just crops but animals, with high concentrations of arable and horticultural crops, a large glasshouse sector. If you like, it's the bread and vegetable basket of the UK. We have progressive farmers and growers. We have some of the large agri-corporates in Genta and Bayer, and we have agri-focused civic bodies. The second important component is our regional expertise. The universities and research centres in the east of England have significant research strength in agri-tech, with nationally significant facilities and expertise in agri-robotics, data, AI, genetics, remote sensing and food. And our third important component is collaboration. Our HEI and RTO partners have worked together equally, despite the fact there are huge differences in research budgets. We focused on our shared vision to develop the agri-tech cluster in the east of England in an arc that runs from Lincoln to Norwich, a bit of a banana if you like, although not growing bananas yet. Partners are supportive and respectful, and we freely shared our expertise and knowledge. The Ceres Agritech process is unique. It provides translational funding and commercialised expertise to accelerate high-quality agri-tech research from lab benches to farmers' fields. For many academics, this is a new concept, very different from grant funding measures based in aliquots of postdocs. It's about putting the right resource to the project, whether that be outsourcing to those that have the right competence to make a prototype, or whether it's doing it on the lab bench. The Ceres team helps academics and their tech transfer offices to shape and develop the agri-tech innovations. We want to take that basic research and make it relevant to industry. If you think about farming and you only have to look out the window to see how much rain we have, this tech has got to work in fields that are knee-deep in mud with the rain coming sideways. And that takes some doing. So we help our academics shape their proposals, and then to get them ready for translational investment, they have to pitch to our investment committee. Now, in order to facilitate capacity building, we had a representative from each partner on the investment committee. But to ensure that we had that independent rigor and that commercial focus, the externals outweighed the internals. The funding is milestoned. You only get the next tranche if you complete the milestones. It's tough love, but it ensures rapid project delivery, quick killing of projects that aren't viable, and allows recycling of funds into new projects. Now, the slides got jumped ahead of me, but I can now talk you through what we've achieved. We've upskilled 230 academics, tech transfer staff, and KE staff. And we did this through our process of developing projects. We've identified 125 projects across the 5 universities. Everybody talks about deal flow, great deal flow. From that, we met 94 of those academics face to face. We developed 49 of those projects, 37 got pitched and 31 got funded. We are particularly proud of our 4 regional spin-outs. We've got CellXcel, which is a chemistry platform technology from UEA that waterproofs biocomposites, meaning that they can be used to lightweight the outside of vehicles, not just your partial shelf. We've got Agaricus Robotics, which is a mushroom harvesting robot that has gone from strength to strength and is currently picking mushrooms in a mushroom farm out near Ely. We've got numerous patent and licensing opportunities. Our spin-outs have raised capital and we're now up to about 6 million, too many noughts on there. But we've also talked about capacity building and networking and building these regional projects around Ceres. And one of the things that came out of this was this AgriForward CDT, which is a collaboration between Lincoln, Cambridge and UEA. And also Barclays Eagle Labs got involved and put their Agritech Eagle Lab on the University of Lincoln Rhizome campus. So unfortunately, Richard Williamson, who's down on the programme, is unable to be here today, and he was going to talk to you about Fruitcast, which is our AI forecasting company. So I'm going to step into the breach and tell you a little bit about Fruitcast's journey. Fruitcast came out of the Ceres programme. It's a University of Lincoln spin-out. Now, Raymond, on the end there, the founder, when we first met him, he was just finishing his PhD. He did a CTP at Lincoln, and he'd done some great research. Actually, he was pretty dynamic. He got himself on Countryfile, pitting his technology against the presenter. No prizes for guessing who won. But what Raymond didn't understand was what the farmers and growers' needs were. So what we did through the Ceres process was we helped him shape what does this tech actually have to do to make a difference in the real world. But Raymond alone didn't have all the skills he needed. Agritech happens at the intersection of different disciplines. We have over 50 different disciplines involved in our pipeline of 30 projects. But he needed computer vision, machine learning, AI, but he also needed the biology, he needed the crop physiology, he needed horticultural expertise. And together, that team came together to put forward a developer pitch for the investment committee. He was successful, and the project went along. We helped him find suitable trial sites. And then as the project came to an end, we realized that actually this was pretty hot technology. If you look at this picture of a glass house, this is the challenge that farmers and growers are facing on a daily basis. They are placing 40 hectares, walls of flowers, green fruit, red fruit. How on earth do they work out how much they've got to pick, when they've got to pick it, and when they've got to get it right? Because they've got to tell their retail customers 6 weeks in advance to turn on a promotion to shift the volume. Get it wrong, they have to go and buy it from somewhere else. So there's a penalty, financial penalty for getting it wrong. But this technology is great because it predicts 6 weeks out what that fruit amount is going to be, how much it's going to be, when it's going to be ready to pick, and therefore there's all sorts of knock-on benefits about how many pickers do you need and how do you arrange your labour. So the first and probably the most key step for myself and my colleague Dr. Ian Thomas was to find some early stage management to support Raymond. And we were really lucky to get Richard Williamson. He was the former MD of Dyson Farming, one of the biggest farming operations in the UK. He had a wealth of business experience, and he was able to wrap a team around Raymond that has, in the end, made it the success it is to date. they've raised 2.8 million. Raymond, he's doing well. He's got himself invited to Rishi Sunak's Innovation Summit pre-Christmas. They liked him so much they invited him back for drinks, the Christmas drinks as well. But the most important thing, I think, for the technology is actually it's out as we speak on soft fruit farms across the UK, counting fruit and making forecasts that is making a difference to growers. It's matching supply and demand, which is absolutely critical. But we haven't stopped with Ceres. Lincoln and Cambridge have recently applied for some EPSRC place-based funding. We've awarded 5 million, and we've also worked with UEA to get 1.5 million from CCF RED from Research England for Agritech Global. And what we're now doing is taking the collaborations that we had with the university partners, and we're bringing in the rest of the civic society, the regional businesses to drive this agri-tech sector in the east of England. We're really lucky. We've got support from Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority. We've got support from Greater Lincolnshire LEP, New Anglia LEP, Lincolnshire County Council, West Lindsey District Council, farmers, growers, businesses, international partners to accelerate agri-tech as an economic driver, a social driver, and an environmental driver of change in the east of England. So what comes next? It takes a long time to grow a cluster. We know from the Cambridge experience that's 10, 20 years plus, with persistence and time on your side. And there are stepping stones on that journey. In the move from a current market failure in agri-tech, which requires government funding and university expertise, to a mixed model of funding, and we hope to get to an evergreen funding model. I'd like to just touch on the lessons that we've learned at Ceres. It's all about the right multidisciplinary team, whether you're talking about a project that you're trying to shape or whether you're talking about the team for the spin out. It's about resolving the challenges of securing pre-revenue funding to bridge the investment gap, especially in agri-tech sector, which is relatively new and investors are not sure what they're getting. But most importantly, it's about the depth, the breadth, and the quality of the partnerships with everybody on board focused on delivering a shared vision. And here you can see the companies from the people that have supported us on the journey. We've got our university partners, our research centre partners, we've got our investment committee, we've got our civic partners, our spin-outs, our accelerators, our farmers, our growers, our businesses, our investors, and not just in the east of England now, but we've got them across the UK. With our new Lincam project, any university that has great agri-tech that could make a difference in the east of England is welcome to come and join the party. And we also have international links with growers around the world in California and Australia and the Netherlands. And I'd like to finish by saying that we would like to thank everybody that is involved in our journey for their help and support. It's a team effort. Thank you very much.
Do you want to go back a slide? Sorry. Just this one's fine. Oh, next one. Nope. That one. This one. Perfect, thank you. Right, hello everyone, I'm Jessica Boot-Marshall. I'm the Industrial Partnerships Manager at the University of Lincoln, and 5 years ago I took on the role of Ceres Coordinator for the university, and this was very different to anything I'd worked on before. So I've got no experience of agri-tech whatsoever. My background was research funding, it was not investment committees, and my knowledge of soft fruits was limited to like Sainsbury's fresh produce aisle. Like it was completely new area. And the subject matter wasn't the only learning curve really being involved in this. So for Lincoln, this has been completely transformative in terms of our activity. The University of Lincoln is a post-92 institution. We're in a very large dispersed county. We've traditionally been focused on teaching, and we've been growing a research portfolio in direct response to our local economy. So agri is major for that, and that's why we've really focused on that in terms of our research expertise. For those who don't know where Lincoln is, and that's probably quite a few people in this room because nobody ever seems to know where Lincoln is, it's in Lincolnshire, which is the second largest county if you take Yorkshire as a whole, and it's on the east coast between Norfolk and East Yorkshire, so it kind of tucked away at the side above Cambridge and Cambridgeshire. And we had a really limited commercialisation portfolio, so we'd got no spin-outs. We had quite a sporadic licenses and disclosures portfolio. It was very, very limited. And so taking part in this project has been amazing, really, in terms of what we've achieved and what we've been able to be exposed to through working with Cambridge Enterprise and the other partners who are involved with this. And that's the reason why we wanted to focus on this really as a case study, because I think a lot of the time, like I've come to this conference before and I've been like, oh, that's brilliant if you've got resource, that's brilliant if you've got funding and all that sort of thing. But Lincoln's never really had access to all of that. And so by taking part in this project with such a major player as Cambridge and being able to have this kind of true knowledge exchange relationship in place, it's brought about so many benefits for us. And so that's why we kind of want to focus on this. And Louise has gone through some kind of the lessons learned and the takings from their perspective. And I wanted to give our perspective really in terms of how we've seen this progress and what we've taken forward. Because we now have 2 spin-outs, a third hopefully on the way, and we've got a number now of licenses and activities that have spawned from this, and we've done that within 4 years, which I'm led to believe is quite quick to expedite this kind of activity. So hopefully, like, we're going to head up with this kind of stuff, but it's actually given us a commercialisation portfolio, which we didn't have before. Excuse me. So as kind of Louise touched on, there were a number of elements that we needed for the partnership to be successful. So that first was that key focus that we shared. So for us, that was agri, but that could obviously be any subject matter really that you all got a direct and relevant interest in. The second is that sense of place. So the geography and the economic climate of the region have been so essential, not just for the reasons that Louise outlined in terms of the geography and the soil and the fact that we have so much farmland, but also in terms of the relationships and the people that are based in those areas. The fact that Innovate UK have now recognised this, and they've got the East of England being the launch pad for agriculture, it's really been recognised in that area, and so we were able to really capitalise on the knowledge and the experience of having that kind of on our doorstep. Thirdly, knowing that the partnership's not just between Cambridge and Lincoln and the other partners involved from the academic community, but also the huge amount of public and private partners that have got involved with this in different guises, and knowing that we're all coming together for this. And then finally, that shared respect of what both of you could bring to the party. So I think it'd be really easy to look at this example and see Cambridge as some sort of benefactor to Lincoln and, you know, quite a top-down relationship really in terms of what they could provide to us. But I believe that it really was a mutually beneficial relationship and that Cambridge really respected the knowledge and the research interest of Lincoln and what we could bring to the table in terms of that academic expertise really in this area. And that's been a really essential part of it, I think, because I think it would be quite easy to see as a David and Goliath, and obviously in some respects we are, but it's always been, I felt anyway, a really respectful relationship on both sides and never kind of a charitable effort from Cambridge. It's always been working together, which has been a really nice activity to be part of with this. So that kind of covers off the 4 things that were, I'd say anyway, that the building blocks of the success of the partnership. But my 3 lessons learned takeaway, so for any other younger, more modern institutions who maybe haven't developed their commercialisation portfolio, these are my 3 things I've learned in being involved in the partnership. So the first is, and this is really obvious, but really make the most of that relationship. Don't just look at the project, but see what else you can get from them. So going down to Cambridge, seeing the campus, seeing how they operate, that has been really interesting. Through the project, I was able to do both the Praxis, new venture creation courses, and also some of my team were able to do that as well. Now, normally we can only afford for one person in the team to do a Praxis course every year. This year, maybe not even that. But the fact that a few of us within a year were able to do these kind of courses and that the project supported that was brilliant. So making the most of the relationships, who they can introduce you to, that wider sphere that they've got has been good, and you need to kind of maximise that opportunity. The second one is around setting up your governance and your policies early on. So before we took part in Ceres, we didn't have a commercialisation board or a spin-out policy or any of the processes around that because we hadn't needed them. And that meant in 2020, so the year that everybody was working from home and there was a lot going on in the world, we were doing our first spin out, but also setting up a commercialisation board and writing and ratifying a spin out policy. We've got a really limited team, and so trying to do that at the same time was a lot of work. So even if you just got thoughts of doing this in the future, start writing your policies now and look at other universities and what they've got in place and just kind of take bits and pieces from them and put that together so that you've got something, because it's quite hard doing it at the same time and probably isn't recommended to do it at the same time, if we're honest, but it was where we were. And then finally, there's so much to learn from that other university, but it's really important to step back every so often and think about what's right for you and your institution. So Cambridge moves at pace, like a pace we were not used to in Lincoln. And because of that, we were like being taken along for this, and it was great, and you know, really learning so much all the time. But every so often we had to stop and think, right, how do we take the lessons that they're giving us and apply them in a way that's right for us? So do we have the resource? Do we have the skills that's going to be able to deliver that? Or are we going to have to look for other ways to do that? And so taking stock and thinking what's useful and what can I take from this, I think is really essential, because otherwise it'd be very easy to just replicate a teeny tiny Cambridge enterprise at Lincoln, but that's not what this project was about. It was about how they support us to do what's right for ourselves. And so make sure that you do take the time to kind of have those checks and balances in place to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's right for you and your organisation. So that was kind of my experience really of working in it. I mean, going back on like the previous point as well, we have a lot less staff, we have a lot less resource than Cambridge, but we also don't have the luxury of risk really in the same way. So everything that we were investing into our projects, we couldn't have. I remember like Ian once told me that they've got a 10% kind of risk envelope really, where they're like, we only expect 10% of this to succeed. And I was like, that's interesting. We're putting £200,000 into this. We can't see only 10% of this activity be successful. We need to see a higher, return on that. So we had to be really careful in making sure that things that we progressed were the right things, and the things that we were going to see a return on, and things that would be worthwhile seeing that return on. And so it's been such an interesting project to be part of. We've seen so much benefit from it. And I really would encourage anybody who's kind of sat here at either end of that commercialisation spectrum to think about what they could offer another university. So whether that's been at the very beginning of your commercialisation journey and thinking, we want to get there, we don't necessarily know how to do that yet. Could we work with maybe a more influential university? But then also for the universities who've got so much wealth of experience in that area, to work with maybe a geographically close partner, or someone who's maybe in a similar kind of cluster, or something that's where you've got a similar research interest. Just having that kind of real knowledge sharing relationship, it can be really rewarding and beneficial to both involved. And so my kind of key takeaway from this is to think about how you could get involved in that type of activity and what you could take forward. So that kind of brings us to the end of the case studies part. I'm going to hand back over to Dan, because I believe now we're going to have more of a panel and questions, and there's been a lot of us talking at you, so hopefully there'll be a bit more interactive.
Thank you, Jessica. So perhaps if I invite our speakers to take an uncomfortable chair, or bring a comfortable chair with you, and maybe kind of sort of arrange yourself at the front there, we can take some questions. If anybody's got one that they wanted to come in with, I'm sure those kind of key points at the end there from Jessica will probably resonate with some of you. Anybody got any opening questions? Yeah, can we get the other mic out, and then we can mobilize that one? Thank you. There's a mic on its way over to you.
Hi, my main question is mainly to Linda, but Jessica also might have some thoughts on it. So it's basically on the ecosystems and how it can be translated into incubation centers, and how those works in a university where facilities have multiple use cases, and it can be exploited in a variety of ways. But is there a particular best way in which it can be utilized so that the ecosystem is maximized.
So I'm going to try and answer this, but I do think it might be actually better for my colleagues who were talking about an entrepreneurial ecosystem, because you're talking about enterprise and, you know, so you guys might have something to offer. So first of all, an ecosystem is a complex system without boundaries. And what happens is we do have a modular approach. Obviously, a lot of people have thought about this for, in fact, the number of publications in the past decade has absolutely boomed, but everyone's talking about it. But essentially it is, it's a complex system which is continually emerging, but in the context of innovation, it doesn't have a specific reason for existing. So it's not just about startups, it's not just about innovation, helping companies to innovate. It's not just about skills and capacity building, it's about all of that. So it's probably better to think about, if in the example that I showed, when I showed what they were actually doing, I showed a set of activities which might have been misleading, because those, when I said research, state-of-the-art facilities, I talked about translational research as a sort of separate type of research, and then I talked about capacity building in terms of creating leaders of the future. But I actually have a set of metrics on this page, and those metrics actually include numbers of startups. You know, it includes a lot of metrics that the team were tracking that really emphasises that they're not talking about one output, they're talking about all the knowledge exchange modalities. So in the type of ecosystem I was involved with, it was about an end goal and everything was relevant. The startups, the licenses that we created, the partnerships that we attracted to help us translate, the work with the catapults to secure yet more funding to do translational work, all of that was relevant whether we were partnering in it or whether we were leading it. And the management and governance that I mentioned, that there was no contracts, but there was management and governance. And in each component of that modular approach, you would have, each major component would have its own management and governance, sometimes overlapping with another project management and governance, but the whole thing was interconnected. I hope that's an answer to your question. I'm not sure. Do you have anything to add about spin-outs?
Yeah, so I suppose from our perspective, from what we've done at Lincoln, that's kind of worked in kind of what you're asking about, it's that finding that niche area that you can really add value to and exploit that as much as you can. So don't spread yourself too thinly. Look at one area and think, right, what can we really do? What resource can we put into that to see that kind of innovative kind of response really in terms of your academic community and what you can provide within that. And if you can do that in response to your local economy, then that's even more effective because you've already got your partners. And you mentioned about innovation centres, I think you said, or incubation centres, and then you're kind of creating and fostering this community of both academia and SMEs or whatever, your local business community looks like within that set area, so that you've already got those partners in development for the activity that you're delivering.
Question there, and we've got one at the front, so we'll go to you first and then come to you next. Thank you.
Thank you, great talks. We've been trying to convince funders to go after a more long-term, milestone-driven approach, and you were talking about the example of being milestone-driven. And I wondered how you supported the academic community to transition to a model of funding that was pretty hardcore milestone driven. What were the challenges and how did you overcome them?
I think that's going to you.
Yeah, I think this is my question. You're right, it is a challenge because it is so different from any other funding model. But the idea is that if you're going to create academics that are ready for a spin-out world, they have to understand the kind of challenges that they're going to face from VC investors, from anybody they talk to. And it's about taking them on a journey. So that's why we get them to, we work with them. It's hands-on, it's co-creation, it's teaching them the skills as they build their pitch deck to understand those kind of questions that they're going to have be able to have the answers to at the tip of their fingers. So it's a learning journey. And you know, some of them don't necessarily understand the milestone process, although you explain it a lot to them. But I think what they find actually is when they're working with others, that the milestone actually helps people focus, because often people get the money and they think, well, as long as I'm fairly where I need to be, it doesn't matter if I go off and investigate this as long as it's fairly close to the scope. But actually, the difference between making something IP 67 and not actually has a critical impact in the real world. So, you know, putting the right milestones in that are going to mean it's a success actually means when you come to the next round, you've spun out and you're looking for that funding, you've built those really critical things like food safety, is it going to work in the real world, all those kind of things that people try and retrofit, and that actually is really difficult to retrofit. So it's about thinking what's really important from the end user and building those in and making those fail milestones. Actually, the time taken to co-create something often means that actually the projects that come forward are very robust, and the amount of times that they actually fail has been pretty small. So that it's a journey, and some people move on that journey much quicker than others, and some need more help than others. But the journey is designed to get them ready for life in a spin-out world.
I think Louise was right as well when she called it tough love, because I think for some of our academics it was definitely a wake-up call for what life in the outside world is going to be like. But I think when you look at Raymond's example and some of the others that were very successful, ECRs were a bit more receptive, I think, to that, because they weren't used to that career as an academic, whereas some of our longer term academics struggled, I think. I don't know your perspective, but I think they struggled more with the crossover. And so maybe focusing on those ECRs was actually really positive for the type of activity and the milestones, because they weren't as entrenched into grant funding in the same way.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Matthew Bird from Edinburgh Napier University. You've all built ecosystems with a sort of wide variety of partners. I was just really interested in understanding what your strategy was for identifying and engaging those suitable ecosystem partners and understanding who had those similar shared goals that you talked about, and how did you, sort of from a business development perspective, at the start reach out and start to build up those networks?
So in my case, and I'd probably say it's really important probably to do more of this, but having a very entrepreneurial academic lead on things is critical in the kind of system that I'm talking about. I think the session that Claire managed earlier, I did note that she had a very active lead academic involved. That was the session before this. Sorry if some people weren't at it. And it's because we can't do this to people. We can't actually create an ecosystem without their complete and utter buy-in. And it's the same with a founder of a company, spin-out company. Unless they are really in it, it's not going to work. So I think when Claire talked about our workshops, for example, I had similar workshops at the start of this endeavour. But the academics were aware of their industry partner challenges. They brought that to the table. We tried to keep sort of growing our academic contribution and then go reach out to those partners again. And so it was in a very iterative cycle. So that was my journey, was much more about start with something and going back to the industry again, and it was kind of very iterative, and it took time. And that was something that Claire emphasised. It takes time, so do it if you do want to create sort of an industry-based ecosystem, the one I was talking about, responding to an industry challenge. you need to care enough about what you can contribute to an industry challenge. You need to build your networks to create that substantial offering, get out there engaging with the industry, but that will continue, it will be iterative, and eventually you'll get to something that's actually self-organising, and people, you're almost like a thing now that people are now identifying as the, the go-to place, and then other people will be attracted in, and it just all takes its own, a life of its own. I'm not sure.
It does take time, but I think if you think about it from what you're trying to create, you're trying to create spin-outs that are successful, but you can't do that if there's nobody who wants to buy their product. And in order to get people to buy the product, so in this case farmers and growers, you have to make sure that you're making something that they're going to want at the end of the day. So you need to bring them in to give that co-creation piece, so you draw them in naturally. And then if you think about something like AgTech, where actually to run AgTech you need a fantastic digital system, because in remote fields, how do you get data uploaded to the cloud, back again onto the robot to make a decision, or are you going to do edge computing? So you need to have civic society involved to think about the digital infrastructure, the roads infrastructure. If you're going to have glass houses and CA facilities and vertical farms, what's the planning laws around that? So actually, all these components can only happen if people are all pulling in together. And I guess we're lucky in the east of England that, farming is front and central. Farming has great opportunities, but actually it has some challenges as well. We are one of the most socially deprived areas in the country. We need to create high-value jobs, and we need to address some of the challenges that farming has created around CO2, climate change, loss of biodiversity. So actually, there's lots of things that agri-tech can help on across the whole ecosystem, hence why drawing people in is so important.
Thank you. Any more? One at the back and another one at the back, and then we'll come to you in the middle there.
Thank you. Hello. My question is about how you can build a compelling narrative around your complex ecosystem, both to the kind of external policy government funders, so that they understand the multifaceted nature of an ecosystem like this, but also down to the bit part players who maybe aren't part of a core funding stream, but equally do contribute to the ecosystem in some way. How do you make sure that they're brought into it?
Yeah, I think that comes down to what we might say is context specificity. So it would be very bespoke to the situation. Your situation would be different, but for mine, the idea of, I put up the analogy about the birds flying information. It was never going to work if we didn't have the supply chain come along with us. The pharmaceutical companies did not want to manufacture their own equipment. They did not want to become innovators in continuous processing. And their existing manufacturers of large equipment for the batch process, the big stir-tank reactors, they were not innovative. They were large organisations that didn't have those future technologies that were required to give that continuous control. So we had to make propositions to tech companies to become involved. And a lot of these collaborations have sort of a dual thing going on. So they have the long-term vision piece, so in this case continuous manufacturing, and then they have shorter term, we call them proprietary projects with the pharmaceutical companies and the supply chain companies. And those projects were sort of fee for service essentially, projects that would help with the current paradigm, so the stuff they're currently doing, whilst moving towards the new paradigm. So that kind of, well, it gave the pharma companies a reason to sort of keep going with the centre, with the long-term vision in mind. But it also, by being part of that whole mix, it gave those innovative new companies access to those large primes, and they were there able to sell other things to them, even if it was supplies, equipment, small pieces of equipment. We did proactively bring in other supply chain companies that we needed. you have to continually sort of evolve. So there were more sort of hand-picked supply chain companies, but we basically created a bit of a marketplace in our ecosystem. And that was, I think, a large part of the offer to the small companies to get involved. So it is very context specific.
Okay, thank you. One at the back there, and then we're coming over to you there.
I'm Pete Gooden at the University of Hertfordshire. We were really happy to be involved in the series programme, and we've taken a number of those kind of mechanisms that series put in place and have applied it to one of our a recently awarded CCF project, which is great. And we're finding a lot of, you know, I suppose teething problems when we use some of the similar metrics, even though it's all fantastically useful and the project's going really well. But I suppose my question is, how do you enforce some of those tranche funding type mechanisms when institutions don't work in those kind of ways? So I suppose maybe a question to Jessica, because Lincoln similarly sort of structured to us, I suppose, that actually being able to move quickly on short-term projects, which maybe have more high risk and could be ended at certain points, but yet the project team might need an RA to be, to be hired on the project. So how do you, I suppose, recommend institutions gear up for those kind of ecosystems or collaborative working?
Good question. So one of the things that we did that was really helpful is we costed a project manager into every project that we had, so that every project that was going through, no matter how small, had even 5% of project management time to look at the milestones, look at the costing, look at the funding, the tranches, and keep everything kind of running on track. And they were like really essential to the project teams that were being put forward. And then it was kind of a re-education really in terms of not just the academic community, but also from professional services perspective of how we were mobilising for that. But it's amazing how quickly you can adapt to that when there's the offer of £250,000 for a project. We adapted because we weren't going to get that money anywhere else. And so you had to be quite agile and flexible. And I suppose that is sometimes one of the benefits of being a smaller institution, that it's quite easy to change stuff because you're working very closely with the people at the top who are making decisions, because you've just got a lot less people, so you've got less layers of bureaucracy involved with it. I'm not saying it was an easy process, but I think that our head of finance, our director of finance, she was involved in the project from the beginning. Our director of research and enterprise, everybody was involved from the beginning and had kind of bought into the fact, we're going to try this, we're going to put all of our effort into it, and hopefully it'll be successful. And so I think that having that flexibility and that agility was quite essential. But I'm not saying it was easy, and not all of our projects succeeded, did they? We had some project failures, which you're going to have in those situations. And that was all part of the learning curve, really, with it going forward.
Yeah, I would add to that that a major theme of the data that I collected was that that high-level advocacy was absolutely critical when you're creating something as big and as strategic as an ecosystem. We've already heard, about, choosing, so it is strategic because it's choosing to build on, be it an institution or a region or even a nation. You're building on strengths in the industry strengths and in the university strengths often. So high-level advocacy in our case meant the principal level tick in the box for this, and not just a tick in the box, leaning into it. Our principal was involved in discussions, met with the large pharma primes that we were engaging with, their board level people, to agree that this was something they could allow us to lead. They could select us to lead on, and that we would deliver. Board level pharma company advocacy, we called them, in particular, a particular person in GSK was an absolute champion for this and continues to be. So I think that removes some of these barriers of small breaks in the resources. It did it certainly for us.
Thank you. We are coming up to the end of the session, but I think we've got time for that last question. It might have to be a 30-second question and a 10-second answer each to keep us to time. Right in the middle there, please.
It's a question for Jessica specifically. So if I understood it right, this collaboration with Cambridge was like completely new and there was no precedent for academics doing any kind of commercialization work. So how did you find that? Did you have to like convince people that it was a good idea? Like both from kind of university management, but also the academics as well. Hopefully this is a quick one.
Yes, we did. We had to do a lot of convincing. No, Cambridge were brilliant in terms of they came in, they did a lot of like Q&A sessions, they did a lot of briefings and that sort of thing, so that was good. We had some key academics in our Lincoln Institute for Agri-Food Technology who were really, really involved in this. So we have a couple of academics who are on quite a lot of the projects and they kind of were ambassadors really for the scheme. But then we did branch out and we got some that were in like computer science and engineering and other parts of the university as well. So we did a lot of internal promotion around it, obviously saying about the fact that you can get £250,000 for your project help. And because it was so quick, like normally if you put in a funding application, you're not hearing for like 3-4 months, are you? But the fact that you knew very quickly, like the day of the investment committee, they got a phone call and said, you've got the money, let's get going with it. That did appeal to some people. But one of the things I found really interesting was actually some of the academics were like, do you know what, I don't want to go into commercialization, I don't want to run a spin out, I don't want to be a millionaire, I'm quite happy in my academic tower. And you have to respect that. And I was thinking it's a shame that I can't do this work because I'd quite like to be a millionaire, but nobody really is paying for my skills in that area. So there was a lot of convincing and a lot of internal promotion, but I think that was kind of a team effort really in terms of how we approached that, because it was something different, so people were interested in how they could take that forward.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for your participation, and please do thank the speakers again.